All right, let's dive into The Garden Party by Catherine Mansfield. It's a story full of beauty and contrast. We're going to be talking about like lavish gardens and a family who's really living the good life and some themes that are really going to make you think. So get ready for some pretty fascinating discoveries.
This story is like one of those beautifully wrapped presents, but when you open it up, there's some seriously deep stuff underneath. Mansfield is just brilliant at capturing the way people act, those little details. And The Garden Party is definitely no exception.
Okay, so let's unwrap this present then. So first we have the Sheridans. They're throwing this huge garden party. They're obviously well off, but maybe a little out of touch with what's going on outside their perfect lawn.
Right.
Have you ever felt like you were kind of living in that type of bubble?
Yeah.
Like shielded from reality? How do you think that affected your perspective?
Yeah, that's such a good point. What's so interesting is how Mansfield uses the setting to show that detachment. So you've got this like picture-perfect garden, roses are blooming, the sky is glowing, it's like a paradise. But it's almost like it's intentionally separate from like the real world, don't you think?
It really is. It's giving very much ignorance is bliss vibes. So in this like bubble of privilege, we meet Laura. She's our main character. She's young. She's excited about the party. But she's starting to question things,
Yeah.
Like when she gets super intrigued by the workmen who are setting up for the party.
Exactly. It's like Laura sees a crack in that perfect little bubble and gets a peek into a whole other life. She's really fascinated by one of the workmen in particular. He's really tall and lanky, and he just seems really comfortable being himself, you know? Do you remember how she even takes a big bite of her bread and butter, like she's trying to be like one of them?
Oh, yeah. I love that part. It shows how she's starting to notice those class differences. And then, boom, the story takes this sharp turn. A man from the nearby cottages dies in an accident. And Laura immediately thinks they should cancel the party. It just feels wrong to be celebrating while something so awful just happened so close by.
Right.
Yeah.
So that brings up this huge question about empathy. Like, how do our experiences shape the way we see the world? Because Laura is really shaken up by it, but her mother and sister are more worried about like keeping up appearances and making sure nothing ruins their party. They even go so far as to call the cottages an eyesore. Which really shows how disconnected they are from those people.
Yeah, it's like they're looking down on them. And it's so jarring to see those two things side by side. You've got all this excitement for the party and descriptions of the fancy food and the music and the guests. And then suddenly you have this darkness, this harsh reminder that life can change in a second. It really makes you think. How would you react if you got news like that while you were planning your own party?
That's something to really think about, isn't it? And it's really interesting how even the little details add to the contrast. Mansfield talks about those tiny flags for the sandwiches and the exquisite cream puffs and all those bright, like almost too much canna lilies. It's all these symbols of how wealthy they are and how they focus so much on appearances. They're so caught up in it all that they almost miss the weight of what's happened outside their little world.
It's like they're trying to make this perfect controlled environment, but then death just throws a wrench in the whole thing. And poor Laura is stuck in the middle. She even starts to wonder if her mom's idea to send a basket of leftover party food to the grieving family is actually out of kindness, or if it's just her mom trying to not feel guilty.
That's such a sharp observation. It really goes to show how complicated good intentions can be, especially when it comes to different social classes. Like, is Mrs. Sheridan truly being compassionate, or is she more concerned with doing what's expected in her social circle? And then, do you think the grieving family even wants their leftover party snacks?
And then there's this really powerful scene where Laura walks down to those cottages carrying that basket. It's like she's leaving her world and entering a completely different one.
It's like she's crossing a line, both physically and emotionally. Remember how she describes the lane? It's smoky and dark, which is the total opposite of the sunny garden party. And the cottages are in deep shade, like they're hidden away from the Sheridan's world.
Oh, yeah, and she can still hear all the sounds from the party as she's walking. The laughter, the silverware, the music. It's like she can't fully grasp that someone actually died until she's right there.
That's such a powerful image. It's like she's carrying her whole world with her, but she's also stepping into this place where life and death are so close together.
And then she finally sees the man who died.
That moment is the turning point of the whole story. She's expecting to see something horrible, but instead she feels the sense of peace and beauty. He seems far, far away, like he's totally free from all the worries of the world she comes from.
It's like she's waking up to something, isn't it? And then she just blurts out, "Forgive my hat."
Oh, gosh, yeah. What do you think that means?
I think it's such a loaded statement.
Mm-hmm.
On one level, she's apologizing for wearing this fancy hat to a place of mourning. But I think it's way deeper than that. It's like she suddenly feels ashamed of her privilege. Like she realizes how big the gap is between her life and the lives of people living outside her garden wall.
Right.
It's like she realizes her world is actually pretty small. I think this is a major turning point for Laura. Even if she can't explain it, it feels like she understands life differently now. But how will all this change her going forward? And what about her relationship with her family? We'll talk about all of that when we come back.
Can't wait.
Me too.
Definitely a lot to unpack there. It's making me think.
Yeah, me too.
So, as we were talking about Laura down in the cottages, I was thinking about how Mansfield uses all these symbols to add these extra layers to the story. You know what I mean? Like Mrs. Sheridan and those lilies she's so obsessed with, they're not just pretty flowers, are they?
Oh, definitely not. I mean, we talked about how the whole garden is kind of a symbol of how sheltered the Sheridans are.
Yeah.
But those lilies seem like they're pointing to something else too. It's like a little mini symbol inside the bigger one, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. I think you're spot on with that. I mean, those lilies, especially the canna lilies with those crazy red stems and the huge, almost too much blooms. I don't know about you, but they make me think about how beautiful but fragile life is, you know? They're gorgeous, but they're going to wilt and die eventually, like everything else. It makes me think about how easy it is to get distracted by all the shiny, pretty things in life. But real life has got all of it, good and bad.
Totally. Yeah, and the way Mrs. Sheridan is just fixated on those lilies, it feels like they represent more than just beauty to her. It's like they're part of this perfect world she's trying to create, you know? All about keeping up appearances and pretending everything's perfect. It reminds me of people who are obsessed with fancy cars or designer clothes. Sometimes it's more about showing off than anything else.
Oh, yeah, that's such a great comparison. It's like they're a status symbol for Mrs. Sheridan. And remember how Laura feels kind of overwhelmed by the lilies? Almost scared of them. It's like she can sense that something's not quite right with all this perfection.
Right. Like maybe true beauty isn't about being perfect and flawless after all.
Yeah.
And speaking of appearances, that whole garden party, it's like a stage set, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And the garden itself is like a huge part of the story. It's not just a pretty place. It's showing us how privileged and isolated they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like that saying, out of sight, out of mind, right? They've literally built walls around their world.
Yeah.
And it keeps them from seeing all the struggles people are going through just outside. So when Laura goes to the cottages, she's crossing all kinds of boundaries, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too.
Exactly. It's like a journey of awakening for her. Think about those images. The garden is like bathed in sunshine. Everything's colorful. But then that lane she walks down is dusky, and the cottages are all in deep shade. Mansfield is painting two different worlds right next to each other.
It's like she's saying that you can't really understand someone else's experience until you've walked in their shoes. You can't just hear about it. You have to see it, feel it, to really get it. What do you think changes for Laura as she walks down that lane?
I think she's losing her innocence with every step you know. Remember at the start, she's so wrapped up in the party, worrying about stuff like what hat to wear. But as she walks down that lane, she sees all the little details. The sick hens and tomato cans and all that. She smells the smoke from their chimneys. All that stuff forces her to think about a reality she's never had to before.
It makes you think about how easy it is to get stuck in your own little world, especially when things are going well for you. But real life has all of it right, the good and the bad. And the way Laura reacts to seeing the dead man is not what you'd expect at all.
It's the opposite of what you'd think, right? She was horrified when she heard about his death. She wanted to cancel the whole party. She couldn't understand why her family wasn't more upset. But when she's actually face to face with death, she feels peace and beauty.
Yeah. It's like in that moment, death feels more real and more important than her family's fake party world. She's seeing things from a totally different angle.
Yeah, exactly. The dead man is like a symbol of truth. Like a truth that Laura has been sheltered from. He's so still, his eyes are closed, he's totally free from all the things people worry about. And that's like the opposite of how busy and frivolous the party is. It's like Mansfield is saying, hey, there's more to life than all this partying and drama.
It's such a strong image.
Yeah.
The stillness of death right next to the craziness of life. And you know what I think is interesting? Laura is super affected by this whole thing, obviously. But her brother, Laurie, he seems to get it on some level too. Even though he didn't go to the cottages, he meets her when she comes back. And there's this unspoken understanding between them.
That's a really good point. Laurie is way more understanding than Jose, who just wants to forget the whole thing happened. Do you remember what Laura and Laurie say at the end? Isn't life? Isn't it, darling? There's There's so much in those little sentences. It's like maybe he's starting to question things too. Like he's seeing the world in a new way.
Maybe they're both realizing that life is more complicated than they thought, which is a great transition to talking about Laura's family, especially her mom, and how they've shaped how she sees things. It makes you wonder how much of who we are comes from the people we grow up with, right?
Absolutely. That's a huge question Mansfield is exploring in this story. So let's talk about that next.
We were just talking about how our families can really shape how we see things. And it makes me think about Laura's mom, Mrs. Sheridan. I mean, she's a complicated character. She's obviously the one in charge. And she wants her party to be perfect. But she's also kind of disconnected from what Laura is feeling about the accident. Like, she doesn't want to deal with those tough realities. Have you ever felt that kind of disconnect with your family? Like, they just don't get where you're coming from.
Oh, totally. I think everyone goes through that at some point, you know, trying to figure out your own values and how they fit with your family's values. And Mrs. Sheridan is a great example of how tricky family dynamics can be. She loves Laura, sure, but she's got this whole vision for how things should be. Like, remember how she's making Laura wear that specific hat, even though Laura's trying to talk about the accident?
Yeah. It's like she's saying, nope, we're not talking about that right now. Just put on your happy face and let's focus on the party. It's kind of funny, but also kind of sad. It's like she's trying to shield Laura from the bad stuff. But that also stops Laura from learning how to be empathetic and understand other people's struggles.
What I find interesting is that Mrs. Sheridan isn't being mean on purpose. She does seem to care about the family of the man who died. But it's always through the lens of her own social status, you know, like with that basket of leftovers. Yeah, it's nice of her, but it also feels like she's just doing what's expected of her to keep things proper.
Right. Like she's trying to smooth things over without really dealing with anything.
Yeah.
And that's where the conflict with Laura comes in. She's starting to see through those social rules. And she's wondering if her family's way of handling things is really compassionate, or if they're just distancing themselves from feelings that make them uncomfortable.
Yeah. And that's all part of growing up, right? It can be hard, especially when you're questioning what the people you love believe in.
So it's not just about Laura encountering a different social class. It's about her becoming her own person, too.
Exactly. She's realizing she doesn't have to see the world the same way her family does.
And it's interesting to compare Laura to her sister, Jose. Jose is all about being practical and keeping things light. She doesn't want anything to ruin the party, not even a death.
Yeah, it's like she's playing the role of the perfect socialite.
While Laura's trying to figure out all these huge questions about life and death and what it all means.
Right, and Jose represents that thing we all do sometimes, trying to avoid difficult emotions.
And then there's Laurie, Laura's brother. He's so different from Jose and their mom. He doesn't get everything Laura's going through, but he respects her feelings. It's like he knows she needs some space to figure things out.
He really is such a good guy, isn't he? And when they say, "Isn't life? Isn't it, darling?" It just says so much. It's like he understands that life's not always perfect, and that's okay.
Yeah, he's not trying to fix anything or give her answers. He's just being there with her in that moment.
It makes you think that maybe Laurie is on a journey of discovery, too. Just not as far along as Laura.
Yeah, maybe. And it's interesting how Mansfield doesn't give us a clear ending. You know, we don't know what will happen to Laura.
Right.
But there's this feeling that anything's possible.
Yeah, like she wants us to keep thinking about it.
Exactly. And maybe think about our own lives, too. Have we ever had something happen that totally changed how we see things? How did our families affect how we see the world? What kind of walls have we built around ourselves?
Exactly. Mansfield is making us ask those questions and think about how we react to life's challenges. It reminds us that being empathetic isn't always easy, but it's super important for connecting with the world.
Even the parts that make us uncomfortable.
Yes. And she reminds us that real growth happens when we push ourselves outside our comfort zones.
When we go beyond our own little garden parties.
And experience the whole range of what it means to be human.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the garden party. What are you taking away from it all?
I think for me, it's a reminder that real change often comes from tough moments, when we have to face difficult truths about ourselves and the world. This is definitely a story that'll stay with me.
Absolutely. It reminds us that even when things seem perfect and happy, there's always more to the story.
And sometimes those tough conversations are the ones that teach us the most.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you some new ideas. And maybe you'll even want to reread the story with a fresh perspective. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. All right, so we're going deep on this one, folks. O. Henry's Jimmy Valentine. And
classic.
Yeah, a classic short story. And, most folks have probably read it at some point, but
Yeah.
we're going deeper than just, what happens in the story. We're really going to unpack this character, the psychology of a guy trying to escape his past, and that ending.
Oh, yeah.
It really makes you think.
It does. It really sticks with you. It's interesting how O. Henry just kind of throws us right into the action. We meet Jimmy as he's getting out of prison, and you would think that he'd be at least a little bit humbled, or relieved, but there's just something about the way that he plays the innocent act that's almost too perfect.
Right.
It makes you wonder, did those 10 months really change him at all, or is he, just biding his time?
Yeah, and then there's that scene with the suitcase, the one that he picks up from his buddy Mike Dolan.
Oh, yeah.
It's like opening Pandora's box.
Yeah.
It's full of these professional-grade burglar tools.
Right.
Worth a fortune back then. Some of them custom designed.
Yeah.
This is where you can really see O. Henry setting up the central conflict of the whole story.
Right.
On the one hand, you have Jimmy putting on this whole act of, being innocent and reformed.
Right.
And on the other hand, you have this undeniable mastery of a very specific and illegal craft.
Exactly. And it's not just the tools themselves, it's what he does right after he gets out. He doesn't go home to family or anything like that.
Right.
Or try to, make a normal life for himself. He goes straight to a restaurant, has a nice meal.
Yeah.
And then goes and gets those tools. So, it really makes you question, is this whole going straight thing, is it all an act?
Is he already?
And he's already. You're strong to resist.
Yeah, and the robberies themselves. I mean, he pulls off 3 of them pretty quickly.
Yeah, he's good at it.
Yeah, he's not some desperate, small-time thief. He's got a system.
Right.
He's meticulous.
Yes, very deliberate.
Almost artistic in his approach.
And that's what Ben Price picks up on. He's the detective who's been after Jimmy for years and years and years, and he can see right through Jimmy's new persona because he recognizes his style. His signature.
His fingerprint.
Exactly. He knows Jimmy's going to slip up.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of time.
So you have this almost Shakespearean kind of setup, right? You've got Jimmy trying to escape his past. You've got Ben Price right on his heels, and then, boom, enter Annabelle Adams.
The love interest.
It's like O. Henry decided to throw a wrench in the works.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, Jimmy has something to lose, something worth changing for.
Yeah. Love at first sight, it might be a cliche, but it's powerful. And for Jimmy, this infatuation, it completely changes his trajectory.
Right.
He takes on a whole new identity as Ralph D. Spencer, the upstanding shoe store owner. He even writes to his old friend and says he's done with crime.
Yeah, he's going straight.
But is it real, or is it just a way to win Annabelle over?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because on the surface, everything seems great.
Yeah.
He's doing well in Elmore, His business is successful. He's engaged to Annabelle. He's even earned the respect of the community.
He's got it all.
He's got it all.
Okay.
But we know what's lurking beneath that carefully constructed surface.
We do, and Ben Price does too.
And Henry doesn't let us forget about Ben either.
No, he doesn't.
He's always there in the background watching Jimmy's every move.
Waiting.
Just waiting for him to mess up.
Yeah, man.
Which leads us to the bank scene.
Yeah.
It's almost too perfect. The new vault Mr. Adams is so proud of, and little Agatha gets trapped inside.
Oh, yeah.
Just innocent kid's curiosity.
Yeah.
Leads to a life or death situation.
Talk about pressure.
And all eyes are on Jimmy.
Yeah.
Suddenly he's caught between this new life he's built and the skills he's tried so hard to bury.
Right.
What's he going to do?
Oh, man. Classico. Henry Wright throws in a twist just when you think Jimmy's got it all figured out.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to this new vault. This isn't some rinky-dink safe he can track in a couple minutes.
Yeah.
This is like the Fort Knox of vaults.
Yeah, it's almost symbolic, isn't it?
Yeah.
The vault is like Jimmy's attempt to lock away his past.
Yeah.
Create this impenetrable front of being a respectable guy.
Exactly. And now it's the very thing standing between him and the woman he loves, the future he's trying to build.
And the irony is that the skills he's tried to bury are the only ones that can save Agatha.
Right. Talk about a dilemma. Does he stay Ralph D. Spencer and risk a child's life? Or does he go back to being Jimmy Valentine the safecracker and risk destroying everything he's worked for?
And don't forget, Ben Price is standing right there watching this whole thing play out.
Oh, yeah. He's been waiting for Jimmy to slip up, but I bet even he's surprised by how intense this situation is.
Yeah. This is life or death.
It really makes you think about what Ben Price is really after. I don't think it's just about catching a criminal.
Right.
He spent years trying to understand Jimmy's mind, what makes a guy like that tick. And I think this is the first time he's seeing Jimmy face a choice that's not about saving himself or getting rich.
It's a true test of his character. And Jimmy doesn't even hesitate. He asks for Annabelle's rose almost like a goodbye to the life they've planned together. And then he goes and gets his tools.
That suitcase, man.
Yeah.
It's like a symbol of him going back to his true self.
The self he tried so hard to deny.
And the way he does it, it's chilling.
Yeah.
He's methodical laying out his tools, but there's this coldness to him.
Yeah, a detachment.
Like he's shutting off his emotions to focus on the job.
Yeah, and it's such a contrast to all the chaos around him. People are freaking out. Time is running out.
But Jimmy's in the zone.
Like he's performing surgery.
Except the stakes are way higher.
And then the door swings open.
Little Agatha, safe and sound. Everyone breathes a sigh of relief.
But for Jimmy, it's not over.
Yeah.
He's shown everyone his secret.
And Ben Price? Now he has to decide what to do with that.
Ultimate showdown, right? The cop and the criminal.
And Ben's decision, it's a big one. It's about more than just catching a bad guy.
It makes you think about justice and mercy, second chances.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to get into in the last part of our deep dive. Because Ben's choice, it says a lot about who he is as a man.
It all comes down to Ben Price in this moment.
Yeah.
He's the one who has to figure out what to do about Jimmy. You know, this guy who's both a criminal and kind of like a hero now.
And it's not just Ben. We're all wrestling with those questions as readers. I mean, can you really forgive someone for all those crimes just because they did one good thing? Is that enough? You know?
Yeah.
O. Henry doesn't give us the answers, but he gives us a look inside Ben Price's head. And that's what makes this ending so powerful.
Yeah, because Ben isn't your typical cop. He's not just going by the book. He really wants to understand Jimmy. Like it's become his personal mission.
Yeah, and he could have just slapped the cuffs on Jimmy right then and there. I mean, he was caught red-handed.
He's closed.
Right. But he doesn't. He hesitates. And I think that shows that he's not just thinking about Jimmy's crimes anymore.
Yeah, he's seeing a different side of him.
Exactly. He's seeing a person who's capable of caring about someone else, even a little girl he doesn't even know.
And that's where the idea of redemption comes in. You know, it's not about forgetting the past. It's about seeing that people can change.
Right. And the way Jimmy acted in that vault, it wasn't fake. It wasn't to impress Annabelle or anything. He was just trying to save that little girl.
He was completely selfless.
And I think Ben sees that. This wasn't just a show. It was the real Jimmy.
It's like that moment in the vault cracked open the real Jimmy.
Yeah, it's like all his walls came down and you could see the good in him.
And that makes Ben's decision to let him go even more powerful. He's not just ignoring the crimes. He's choosing to believe that people can be better.
Yeah, when he says, "Guess you're mistaken, Mr. Spencer," it's like he's giving Jimmy a clean slate.
That's a huge act of kindness.
It really is. It's like saying, hey, I believe in you. You can be this new person.
But it also leaves us with some questions, doesn't it? What about those other robberies? Does Jimmy just get away with them? Is that really fair?
I know. Henry doesn't tie everything up in a neat little bow. He wants us to think about it.
Yeah, he makes us face the fact that things aren't always black and white.
Right. People are complicated. And sometimes good people do bad things.
So what does all this mean for us? I think Jimmy Valentine reminds us that judging someone based only on their past mistakes, well, it's not the whole story.
Yeah, people can grow. They can make different choices.
And it shows us the power of second chances. You know, even when someone might not deserve it, giving them another shot can change everything.
Yeah, Ben's decision to let Jimmy go, and it wasn't about saying crime is okay. It was about believing in the good in people.
And maybe, just maybe, there's a little bit of Jimmy Valentine in all of us.
Yeah.
We all have our secrets, good and bad.
It's true.
It's the choices we make that really show who we are.
So I guess what we're saying is, don't just read Jimmy Valentine as a crime story. Think about the bigger questions. You know, second chances, human nature, hope. And remember, sometimes the best stories are the ones that leave you with more questions than answers.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time. All right. Welcome in, everybody. Get comfy. And let's do this. We're diving deep today, folks.
Diving deep.
And we're talking about, well, how to really get the most out of studying, reading, all that good stuff.
Learning.
Learning, exactly.
Yeah.
And we're going really old school for inspiration on this one.
No. How old are we talking?
I think 16, 25, old.
Whoa. Okay, yeah, that's pretty old school, right?
It is. So we've got this essay of studies by Sir Francis Bacon.
I've heard of him.
Of course, he was a big deal back in the day. And honestly,
Yeah?
his insights are shockingly relevant even now.
Yeah. What's he got to say about hitting the books then?
Well, right off the bat, he lays out 3 major reasons why we should even bother, calls them the threefold benefits.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
All right, so benefit number 1, Delight. Learning should bring you joy.
Makes sense. If you're not enjoying it, what's the point?
Exactly. Benefit 2, ornament. Bacon's talking about communication here.
So like studying makes you a better speaker, writer, all that.
You got it. Being able to express yourself clearly, that's valuable stuff. And finally, benefit 3, ability.
Ability.
Yeah, like study sharpens your mind, so you make better decisions. In work, in life, you name it.
So basically he's saying studying makes you happier, helps you communicate better. A&D makes you a sharper decision maker.
That's a pretty sweet deal if you ask me, and no pop quiz required.
Right. Sign me up.
But hold on, there's a catch. Bacon wasn't about just cramming your head full of facts 24/7.
Ooh. What'd he say?
He actually warned against going too hard on the studying thing. Said too much of it is, get this, sloth.
Sloth. Like the sleepy animal.
Yep. Because you're not applying that knowledge, you're just passively absorbing it.
Huh. Interesting. So it's not just about reading all the time. It's about doing something with that knowledge.
Bingo. And he goes even further. Using your knowledge just to show off, to sound smart, that's affectation, he says.
Yeah, we all know that person who just wants to name drop fancy authors they probably never even read.
Uh-huh, for sure. And last but not least, relying only on what you read without any real-world experience, well, that makes you impractical.
Like book smarts versus street smarts, right?
Exactly. It's all about finding the balance. Knowledge without action is kind of pointless, you know?
Especially nowadays, right? I mean, we're flooded with information constantly.
Oh, tell me about it. It's easy to just keep consuming, but never actually do anything with all that input.
Totally. It's like having a pantry full of amazing ingredients, but never actually cooking a meal.
Such a good analogy. And speaking of good analogies, Bacon had a brilliant one to illustrate this whole knowledge versus action thing.
I'm all ears.
He compared our natural abilities, our talents, to plants.
Plants.
Yeah. He said just like plants need pruning to thrive, our talents need to be shaped and refined through study.
I love that. So it's like study gives us the structure, the blueprint, but experience is what actually builds the house.
That's a great way to put it. You could read every book about playing piano, but you wouldn't actually become a pianist.
Until you sat down, practiced, messed up a bunch, figured out how to make the music come alive.
You got it. Okay, so we've got the WHY of studying down. Now, how about the HOW?
Yeah, how should we actually be approaching all this reading and learning?
Well, Bacon had some pretty strong opinions on that too, and this is where it gets really interesting. He compared different books to, wait for it, different types of food.
Okay, now I know he was a genius. Tell me more.
Right. So he said some books are like tasting menus.
Just a little nibble to get the flavor?
Precisely. Others are like, just good solid meals. You read them straight through, no problem.
Makes sense. Some books are just easier to digest than others.
And then there are the books that are like, I don't know, a 5-course feast with all the bells and whistles.
The kind where you've got to take your time, savor each bite, really let it sink in.
Exactly. These are the books you wrestle with, the ones that challenge your thinking and maybe even change your worldview.
So it's not just about how MUCH you read, but how W read it.
Absolutely. Makes you think about your own reading style, right? Are you more of a skimmer or a deep diver?
It definitely depends on the book and what I'm hoping to get out of it, I think.
Me too. But there's one way of reading that Bacon really wasn't a fan of. He called it reading by deputy.
Reading by deputy, what's that?
Basically, relying on summaries or someone else's interpretation instead of reading the original work yourself.
Ah, like Spark Notes, instead of actually tackling Shakespeare.
You know it. And honestly, sometimes that's fine, especially if you're just trying to get the gist of something.
Yeah, if it's not a book that's really going to impact your life, a summary might be enough.
Right. But for those truly important, thought-provoking works, the ones that can really change the way you see the world.
You got to put in the effort and wrestle with those ideas yourself.
Agreed. There's nothing quite like having that aha moment when you finally grasp a difficult concept on your own.
And speaking of challenging yourself, Bacon had this other wild idea. He believed that any weakness in your thinking, any flaw in your logic, could be improved by studying the right subject.
So like targeted training for your brain.
Exactly. He even gave a specific example. Said someone who has trouble focusing, a wandering wit, could benefit from studying mathematics.
Because math requires such precision and concentration.
Exactly. It would help train their mind to stay on task.
Man, I could use some of that math brain training. So, following that logic, If you struggle with decision-making, maybe philosophy would help.
Yeah, to learn how to weigh different perspectives and arguments.
It's like tailoring your learning to your specific needs and weaknesses.
Exactly. Now, this all leads to a really important point, which is summed up in a Latin phrase. Abunt studia in mores.
Latin. You're really taking us back to school today.
Haha, sorry. It means studies pass into and influence manners.
Okay, so it's about more than just acquiring knowledge. It's about shaping who you become as a person.
Exactly. The things you choose to study, the ideas you engage with, they influence your values, your perspective, how you interact with others.
It's like you are what you eat, but for your mind.
I like that.
So to sum it all up, studying, reading, learning, it's not just about homework or getting a job. It's a lifelong journey.
It's about growing as a person, becoming more well-rounded, happier, more effective in the world.
And you know what blows my mind? Bacon wrote this stuff almost 400 years ago, but it's still so relevant today.
It really shows how much power there is in thoughtful learning.
Absolutely. But it does make you wonder, right? Bacon didn't have the internet, social media, all this information overload we face today.
Right. He couldn't even imagine it.
So what would he say if he were here now? How would he advise us to navigate this crazy world of information?
That's a good question. What do you think?
That's a tough one. It's almost like we need another essay from the guy.
Right. A sequel of Studies 2.0.
Of studies in the digital age.
Yeah, that's
like it. But seriously, folks, how do we find those truly valuable, impactful things to study when we're bombarded with so much noise?
It's a challenge, for sure.
It is. So what I want you to do, listeners, is think about that. How do you choose what to study? How do you cut through the clutter and find those gems of knowledge that really make a difference? Let us know what you think, because I'm really curious to hear your take on this.
Yeah, me too.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for our deep dive into the wisdom of Sir Francis Bacon. Until next time, keep those minds sharp and keep learning.
Keep learning. Hey, everyone. Ready for something powerful? Today, we're diving deep into Mother Teresa's Nobel Peace Prize lecture.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, we all know her work, but to actually get into her words, it gives you such a different perspective on her beliefs.
Absolutely.
Like how she saw the world and everything.
It's like a roadmap to her soul, really.
Right. And we've got the full text here.
Amazing.
Plus some really thought-provoking exercises to go with it.
That's cool.
But what really struck me were her thoughts on peace.
Oh, yeah.
Like where it truly begins, you know? And of course, her work with the poor and the dying.
Of course, yeah.
It's just incredibly moving.
It is, yeah.
And then there's her stance on abortion, which, you know, she definitely didn't shy away from.
She never did, no.
So right off the bat, she starts her lecture with a prayer by St. Francis of Assisi.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she even mentions how surprised she was that a prayer from like centuries ago could still feel so relevant.
Yeah.
It's like it transcends time or something.
It doesn't...
What do you think is so powerful about this particular prayer?
Well, you know, when you really think about it, it's all about love, forgiveness, bringing light to the darkness. Mm-hmm. It's almost like she's setting the stage with it, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like laying the groundwork for everything she's about to say.
Right.
That piece begins with these fundamental values.
That's so true. And then she gets into this idea that real love, like true love, has to hurt.
Oh, wow.
And she uses Jesus's sacrifice as like the ultimate example.
Yeah.
It's pretty intense, huh?
It is intense.
But if you connect it back to Mother Teresa's life, it makes sense.
Oh, totally.
I mean, her entire life was dedicated to serving others.
Yeah.
Often in really difficult situations, you know?
Absolutely, yeah.
She saw even the smallest acts of kindness as like these profound expressions of love, even if they demanded something from her.
Yeah, even if they hurt.
This reminds me of that story she tells about visiting a nursing home.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the residents had everything, beautiful surroundings, all their material needs met.
Wow.
But they were all just, like, waiting.
It's like something was missing.
Exactly. It's like something was missing.
That's where she introduces the idea of poverty of the spirit.
Right.
Huge focus for her.
And it's like they had all the material wealth, but were yearning for something deeper.
Yeah, human connection, purpose, love even.
And you know what's interesting?
What?
She found this kind of poverty, the poverty of the spirit, even more challenging to address than material poverty.
Really?
Yeah, it's wild.
That is interesting.
And she saw this not just in that nursing home, but in wealthy nations all over. Places where people seem to have it all but still feel empty.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, what truly brings meaning to our lives?
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
We have to talk about the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Mother Teresa had some strong words about abortion.
Very strong.
Yeah, she called it the greatest destroyer of peace. A direct war. A direct killing. Even
These are intense statements.
Yeah, they are.
And I think it's important to remember the context.
Absolutely.
I mean, she dedicated her life to working with unwed mothers,
Right.
advocating for adoption and natural family planning.
Right.
So to her, abortion was like a direct contradiction to her whole mission.
Protecting life in all forms.
Exactly. Protecting life in all its forms.
It wasn't just a difference of opinion for her.
It was a fundamental clash of values.
Right, exactly.
And she even shared some pretty startling statistics about her work in Calcutta,
Oh, wow.
talking about how they saved thousands of lives through adoption
Yeah.
and taught natural family planning to families who wanted to space out their births.
Right, right.
It was a huge part of her work.
It's interesting, though, how she presented natural family planning.
Oh, yeah.
Not just as a way to limit family size, but as a way to promote the health and unity of the family.
That's a really good point. Not just preventing pregnancy, but fostering stronger relationships.
Right. It wasn't just about what she was against,
Exactly.
but also what she was promoting as a better way.
Absolutely.
Well, her stance on abortion is definitely controversial.
For sure.
It's important to understand where she was coming from
Yeah.
and the impact her work had on countless lives.
Absolutely. Countless lives.
You know, despite her strong opinions, Mother Teresa had this incredible ability to see the greatness in everyone,
She did.
especially those who had been marginalized,
Yeah.
cast aside by society.
Yeah.
There's this really powerful part where she describes picking up 4 people from the street.
Oh, yeah.
And one of them was in just horrific condition.
Oh, gosh.
It's really hard to even read.
I bet. Yeah.
But what's remarkable is the dying woman's reaction.
Really?
Yeah, even in her final moments, all she could say was, "Thank you."
Wow.
Just think about that for a second.
Yeah.
Facing death,
Yeah.
and all she can express is gratitude.
For being seen, I guess.
Yeah, right, just for being seen and cared for.
Wow. That's powerful.
It really is.
It says so much about human connection, doesn't it?
It does.
Being treated with dignity and respect.
Even in the face of such suffering.
Yeah, even then, it really makes you think about how much we all crave that.
Yeah.
That basic human connection to be seen and acknowledged.
And treated with dignity, right.
Yes, exactly.
And then she tells this other story about a man they found in a drain.
Oh, no.
Yeah, half-eaten by worms.
Oh, that's awful.
I know. It's almost too gruesome to even imagine.
Yeah.
But even he, in that state, said he was going to die like an angel loved and cared for.
Oh, my gosh.
I know. How do you even process that?
It shows you how Mother Teresa saw those living in poverty.
Yeah.
She didn't see them as objects of pity,
No.
but as individuals with dignity and worth.
Right.
You know, she recognized their
Resilience.
Yes, exactly.
Even in the face of such suffering.
She believed they had something to teach us.
I think so, too.
About gratitude, about finding joy in the simple things.
About life and death, really.
Yes, absolutely.
It's like she was saying, even in the darkest places,
Yeah.
you can still find light.
You can still find love.
Exactly.
And she wasn't just talking about helping the poor.
Yeah.
She wanted us to change our perspective.
To learn from them.
Yeah. Recognize that we can learn just as much from them as we give.
Okay, there's this other story.
Yeah.
I just loved it.
Okay.
About a little boy who gave up sugar to help her children.
Oh, wow.
It's just so pure, so heartwarming.
It really is. And what's amazing is that he was only 4 years old.
I know, right?
And he understood sacrifice.
Yeah, sharing what he had.
Even though he probably had very little himself.
It's like he instinctively understood what she was saying about love having to hurt.
You think so?
Yeah, like he was willing to give up something he enjoyed to help others.
I think that's something we all have within us.
That capacity for empathy.
Yes. Compassion, putting others before ourselves.
We just have to awaken it.
Exactly.
Reading this lecture, I felt like she was speaking directly to me.
Oh, yeah?
Like challenging me to be better, to do more.
I felt that way, too.
You did.
Yeah, her words have this power,
They
cut through everything else.
And touch something deep.
Yes, and they're not just concepts.
They're calls to action.
She's inviting us to take her message and apply it.
And she's not saying we have to go to Calcutta.
Right.
She says love begins at home.
That's right.
It's those small acts of kindness
The everyday things.
that we often overlook.
Smiling at a stranger.
Offering a helping hand.
Listening to a friend.
Those things
They're the building blocks.
of a more compassionate world.
And she says, it's not about the quantity of our actions,
Right.
but the quality of love we put into them.
The intention.
Exactly. Are we acting out of genuine care?
Or just going through the motions.
Yeah, that's the real question.
She talks about how her nuns weave their lives with prayer.
Oh, yeah.
With Christ.
To really understand the suffering of others.
It's so important.
Yeah, for her, faith was a source of strength.
It fueled her work.
She saw the face of Christ in everyone.
And it gave her the energy to keep going.
Even when it was so hard.
And she also talks about the poverty of the West.
That's interesting.
And how it's different but just as real.
Than what she saw in Calcutta.
Yeah.
She said it was easier to alleviate physical hunger.
Then the hunger for love, belonging, purpose.
That was much more complex.
And she saw it manifesting in drug addiction.
Loneliness, despair.
Issues we still struggle with today.
It's a reminder that true peace goes beyond just material well-being.
It's about creating a society where everyone feels valued and connected.
Loved.
So, what does all this mean for us?
What do we take away from this?
What can we apply to our own lives?
Well, I think her message is about hope and empowerment.
Okay.
She believed that each of us has the power to make a difference.
It's not about waiting for governments or big organizations.
It's about us taking responsibility.
Starting right here, right now.
In our own communities.
It's about recognizing the dignity of every human being.
And treating each other with kindness and respect.
And love.
And choosing to see the light even in the darkest places.
And she had that amazing quote about the power of a smile.
Even when things are tough.
It's so simple, yet so profound.
It is. It's a reminder that even the smallest gesture can have a ripple effect.
A smile can be an act of connection.
A spark of hope.
It's a reminder that love can be expressed in so many ways.
And those small acts of kindness can make a difference. Like even in the midst of all that darkness, a smile can be a beacon of light.
And speaking of beacons of light, there's another story she shares about a man who was paralyzed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and bedridden for 20 years.
20 years.
His only source of joy was smoking.
Oh, gosh.
But he gave it up.
He gave it up.
For a week.
Wow.
And sent the money he saved to her.
That's incredible.
It's a testament to the human spirit, right?
It really is.
Like, despite his own suffering,
Yeah.
he found a way to contribute.
To share what little he had.
With those he saw as having even less.
It really challenges our perceptions of generosity.
And you know what she did with that money?
What?
She bought bread for the hungry.
Wow.
It's like this beautiful circle.
Of generosity.
That compassion.
Shows that everyone has something to offer.
No matter their circumstances.
And those small acts of giving.
They create this ripple effect.
Of love and kindness.
What really strikes me about this whole lecture is her belief in the power of love.
It wasn't just an idea for her.
No, it was a driving force.
Yeah, a catalyst for change.
And she challenges us to embrace that love.
To let it flow through us.
Touch the lives of everyone we meet.
It's not about waiting for those big opportunities.
No, it's about the everyday acts of kindness.
The small ways we can make a difference.
Right here, right now.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Mother Teresa's lecture, I think the question is,
how can we bring more of that love into our own lives?
How can we be that burning light?
That source of hope.
In a world that can feel so dark?
It's a challenge.
It is.
But it's one worth embracing.
Absolutely. Because in answering that call,
in choosing to love,
to serve,
to make a difference,
we honor her legacy.
And create a better world.
For ourselves and for generations to come.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was really something.
We hope you'll take some time to reflect on her message.
And consider how you can bring more love and light into the world.
Remember, even the smallest act of kindness can make a difference.
Start today.
Smile at someone.
Offer a helping hand.
Listen with an open heart.
You never know the impact you might have.
Until next time, keep diving deep.
And keep seeking those nuggets of wisdom.
That can change the way you see the world. All right, get ready to dive into a world of secrets and some seriously messed up power dynamics.
Oh yeah, we're going deep into Robert Browning's My Last Duchess.
This poem will stick with you long after you've finished it.
Absolutely. It throws you right in. Suddenly you're standing in this opulent palace.
Face to face with a duke who wants to tell you a story.
And what a story it is.
Yeah.
It was like eavesdropping on a very one-sided conversation.
We're not hearing from Browning directly, are we?
Nope. We're listening in on the Duke of Ferrara as he reveals more about himself than he probably intends.
About himself and his late wife, the Duchess.
Yeah. It's called a dramatic monologue.
It's like we're guests in his home.
He's giving us a tour.
Yeah.
And he casually points to this portrait.
And says, "That's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive."
Right.
Hold on a second. He's talking about her like she's still standing right there.
I know, right? Creepy. It gets under your skin immediately.
And we're just 2 lines in.
And then there's that name drop. Fra Pandolf.
The artist. Like a subtle flex.
Oh, for sure. He's showing off his wealth and his taste.
He wants us to know he can afford the best. Even for a portrait of his dead wife.
Totally. And remember that line? Since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you, but I.
Still controlling her image even in death.
Exactly. He's the gatekeeper of her memory.
And wait, this is just the beginning?
Oh, yeah. This is just the tip of the iceberg. The whole poem is this long monologue from the Duke. But the more he talks about the Duchess,
the less we actually learn about her.
Right.
It becomes clear that this poem isn't really about her at all.
No, it's about him. His jealousies, his need for control.
He starts listing all these things that bothered him about her, like she was too soon made glad, too easily impressed.
He was annoyed by her simple joys, the way she appreciated a sunset.
Or how she blushed when someone gave her cherries.
Yeah, her genuine warmth.
It threatened his sense of self-importance.
Right, like, why is she smiling at other people? That smile should only be for me.
He wanted to possess her happiness. But you can't control genuine emotions like that. It's impossible.
And that's where Browning really gets inside the Duke's head. Remember the lines, "Sir, 'twas all one, my favor at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west."
Placing his expensive gift on the same level as a sunset.
Totally missing the point of her simple joys.
He just doesn't get it.
And then there's that line that just drops.
I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together.
Chilling.
He just casually implies he had her killed. Because she wasn't the obedient wife he wanted.
And the really disturbing part, he doesn't even see it as a crime.
Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling?
Like, he's so blinded by his arrogance, his power, that he can't even fathom that he did anything wrong.
So he's left with this static portrait, this image of a woman he couldn't control in life. It's like he's trying to rewrite her story.
And we can see right through his facade.
Absolutely. What's even more disturbing is at the very end, he casually mentions the dowry and the new Duchess.
Oh, yeah. He's already moving on, objectifying another woman before he's even met her.
And then that last image, a bronze statue.
Neptune, though, taming a seahorse.
A reminder that the Duke is still trying to control everything around him.
Even nature itself. It's like he thinks he can tame the sea.
Browning packs so much into this poem. Power, jealousy, control. The dangers of a single perspective.
It's a powerful commentary on how women were treated,
Yes.
possessions,
Yeah.
rather than people. And there's so much more to unpack. Like, what was going on in the world when Browning wrote this?
Oh, yeah, good point. Let's zoom out a bit and look at that historical context. What do you think?
Let's do it.
All right, so we've got this creepy Duke with a serious control problem, but let's zoom out for a second.
Yeah.
And look at the world Browning was living in. When he wrote this back in 1842,
Okay.
Victorian era.
Right. A time of major social and political upheaval. People think of Victorians as buttoned up and proper.
Right.
But there was a lot brewing beneath the surface.
So how does a poem about a jealous Duke fit into all of that?
Well, think about it. Even though Queen Victoria was on the throne, women's lives,
Yeah.
they were still very much controlled by men, especially within marriage. Society placed a lot of emphasis on a woman's obedience to her husband.
You can definitely see that in the poem. The Duke is obsessed with controlling the Duchess's every move, even her emotions.
Exactly. And he's not just controlling her physically, he's trying to control her very essence, her warmth, her kindness. He sees it as a threat because he can't possess those qualities.
Which is, of course, impossible. You can't force someone to be happy or only express affection for you. It just doesn't work that way.
And that's the tragedy, isn't it? At the heart of the poem, the Duke destroys the very thing he claims to love because he's so consumed by his need for control. It's like he's trying to turn her into this lifeless object, like a statue or a painting, something he can possess and display.
So this poem, it's a work of fiction, right?
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if Browning based the Duke on anyone real. Like, was there a real Duke of Ferrara with a dark secret?
Now that's where it gets really interesting. While Browning never explicitly said who inspired the poem, many scholars believe he was drawing inspiration from the story of Alfonso II d'Este, the Duke of Ferrara, in the late 16th century.
Okay, so there really was a Duke of Ferrara.
There was.
Tell me more. What was he like?
Well, Alfonso was a major patron of the arts, much like the Duke in the poem.
Mm-hmm.
He commissioned beautiful works, surrounded himself with luxury, but he also had a reputation for being, shall we say, difficult. There were rumors surrounding the death of his first wife, Lucrezia de' Medici.
Sounds suspicious. It's almost like Browning is taking this historical tidbit and weaving it into a larger exploration of power and control.
Precisely. He isn't just retelling history. He's using it as a lens to examine these timeless issues. He's looking at the psychology of a man who feels entitled to control everything and everyone around him. And he's asking us to think about the ways women's voices were often silenced,
Yeah.
their lives controlled by men.
So even though this poem was written centuries ago, it still resonates today, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We still see these power dynamics at play, unfortunately. We still grapple with issues of gender inequality, abuse of power, the ways society values surface appearance over genuine connection.
And Browning does it all through this unreliable narrator, letting the Duke hang himself with his own words.
That's the brilliance of the dramatic monologue. We have to read between the lines, question everything the Duke says, and draw our own conclusions.
We become detectives, piecing together the truth about the Duchess and her fate.
Right.
You know what's really striking me as we're talking about this? It's how the poem ends. It doesn't wrap things up neatly or give us a clear moral. It leaves us feeling unsettled, with a sense of unease.
Yeah, you're right. It's like the Duke has learned nothing. He's already moving on to his next target, talking about the dowry for his new Duchess, reducing her to a transaction.
And that final image of Neptune taming the seahorse, it's just chilling. It's a reminder that he's still trying to control everything, everyone, even the forces of nature.
Exactly. And it leaves us with this question. Will history repeat itself? Will the new Duchess suffer the same fate? Browning doesn't give us the answers, but he certainly makes us think.
He forces us to look at those uncomfortable truths about human nature, about the potential for power to corrupt. And it makes you wonder, what would the Duchess's side of the story be? What if she could speak for herself?
Now, that's a thought-provoking question, and maybe that's part of why this poem remains so powerful. It challenges us to think about the stories that often go untold, the voices that are silenced. It invites us to look beyond the surface, and consider the perspectives that are often missing.
It's like there's this whole other layer to the poem waiting to be explored. But you know what else I'm realizing?
What's that?
Browning's use of language, it's just as fascinating as the story itself.
Oh, absolutely. The way he uses words to reveal the Duke's character. It's masterful.
Should we dive into that a bit?
Let's do it. I'm all ears.
All right, so we've talked about the Duke's controlling nature, the historical context, and the poem's unsettling ending. But I'm really intrigued by how Browning uses language to create this chilling portrait of the Duke. It's like he's revealing his true character without even directly telling us.
You're absolutely right. He's a master of subtle manipulation. He doesn't just tell us the Duke is arrogant or insecure. He shows us through the Duke's own words.
Give me an example. What are some of the things he says that reveal more than he intends?
Well, think about how he casually name drops Fra Pandolf, the artist who painted the Duchess's portrait.
Right.
Or how he brags about his 900-years-old name. He thinks he's impressing us with his wealth and lineage.
But it comes across as totally obnoxious, right? Like he's trying too hard to prove something.
Exactly. It's called dramatic irony. The Duke thinks he's presenting himself as sophisticated and powerful, but to us, the listeners, he's revealing his deep-seated insecurity and arrogance.
It's like watching someone dig their own grave with every word they say.
That's a perfect way to put it. And Browning does this through these subtle word choices. The Duke's tone, his pacing. Notice how he keeps interrupting himself, going off on tangents.
Yeah.
It's like he's trying to convince himself as much as he's trying to convince us.
It makes him seem so unreliable as a narrator. Like we can't trust anything he's saying.
Right.
And that makes us work harder as listeners.
Exactly. Browning is challenging us to read between the lines, to consider what's not being said, and to draw our own conclusions about the Duchess and her fate. We become detectives, piecing together the clues from the Duke's carefully constructed facade.
And what makes it even more intriguing is that we never hear the Duchess's side of the story. Her voice is completely silent.
That silence speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what she would say if she had the chance. What was her experience of this marriage? What were her hopes and dreams? What kind of person was she, beyond the Duke's limited and biased perspective?
It's like there's this whole other layer to the story that's hidden from view, and Browning is inviting us to imagine what that story might be, to give voice to the silenced.
And that's what makes My Last Duchess so powerful. It's not just a creepy tale of a jealous duke. It's a poem that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, control, and the ways in which women's voices have often been marginalized throughout history.
I don't know about you, but I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for this poem. It's definitely one that I'll be thinking about for a long time.
Me too. And that's the beauty of great literature, isn't it? It stays with you, provokes you to think differently, and invites you to return to it again and again.
Each time discovering new layers of meaning.
Exactly.
Well said. So to our listener, we leave you with this. What happens when we give voice to the silenced? What new perspectives emerge when we challenge the dominant narrative and seek out the untold stories?
Keep asking those questions. Keep exploring. Keep diving deep.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into My Last Duchess. Until next time.
All right, so we've got this creepy duke with a serious control problem. But let's zoom out for a second and look at the world Browning was living in when he wrote this poem back in 1842.
Okay, so...
Victorian era.
Right, a time of major social and political upheaval. People think of Victorians as all buttoned up.
Right.
And proper, but there was a lot brewing beneath the surface.
So how does a poem about a jealous duke fit into all of that?
Well, think about it. Even though Queen Victoria was on the throne, women's lives were still very much controlled by men, especially within marriage. Society placed a lot of emphasis on a woman's obedience and subservience to her husband.
And you can definitely see that playing out in the poem. The Duke is obsessed with controlling the Duchess's every move, even her emotions. It's like he wants to own her happiness.
Exactly. And he's not just controlling her physically, he's trying to control her very essence, her warmth and kindness. He sees it as a threat because he can't possess those qualities. Which is, of course, impossible. You can't force someone to be happy or to only express affection for you. It just doesn't work that way.
And that's the tragedy at the heart of the poem. The Duke destroys the very thing he claims to love because he's so consumed by his need for control. It's like he's trying to turn her into this beautiful, lifeless object, like a statue or a painting, something he can possess and display.
So this poem, it's a work of fiction, right?
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if Browning based the Duke on anyone real. Was there a real Duke of Ferrara with a dark secret?
That's where it gets really interesting. While Browning never explicitly said who inspired the poem, many scholars believe he was drawing inspiration from the story of Alfonso II d'Este, the Duke of Ferrara, in the late 16th century.
Okay, so there really was a Duke of Ferrara.
There was.
Tell me more. What was he like?
Well, Alfonso was a major patron of the arts, much like the Duke in the poem. He commissioned beautiful works, surrounded himself with luxury. But he also had a reputation for being, shall we say, difficult. There were rumors surrounding the death of his first wife, Lucrezia de Medici.
Sounds suspicious. It's almost like Browning is taking this historical tidbit and weaving it into a larger exploration of power and control.
Precisely. Browning isn't just retelling history. He's using it as a lens to examine these timeless issues. He's looking at the psychology of a man who feels entitled to control everything and everyone around him. And he's asking us to think about the ways women's voices were often silenced, their lives controlled by men.
So even though this poem was written centuries ago, it still resonates today, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We still see these power dynamics at play, unfortunately. We still grapple with issues of gender inequality, abuse of power, the way society often values surface appearances over genuine connection.
And Browning does it all through this unreliable narrator, letting the Duke hang himself with his own words.
That's the brilliance of the dramatic monologue. We have to read between the lines, question everything the Duke says, and draw our own conclusions.
We become detectives, piecing together the truth about the Duchess and her fate. What's really striking me as we're talking about this? It's how the poem ends. It doesn't wrap things up neatly or give us a clear moral. It leaves us feeling unsettled with a sense of unease.
You're right. It's like the Duke has learned nothing. He's already moving on to his next target, talking about the dowry for his new Duchess, reducing her to a transaction.
And that final image of Neptune taming the seahorse is just chilling. It's a reminder that he's still trying to control everything and everyone, even the forces of nature.
Exactly. It leaves us with this question. Will history repeat itself? Will the new Duchess suffer the same fate? Browning doesn't give us the answers, but he certainly makes us think.
He forces us to look at those uncomfortable truths about human nature, about the potential for power to corrupt. And it makes you wonder, what would the Duchess's side of the story be? What if she could speak for herself?
Now, that's a thought-provoking question. And maybe that's part of the reason why this poem remains so powerful. It challenges us to think about the stories that often go untold, the voices that are silenced. It invites us to look beyond the surface, you know, and consider the perspectives that are often missing.
It's like there's this whole other layer to the poem waiting to be explored. But you know what else I'm realizing?
What's that?
Browning's use of language. It's just as fascinating as the story itself.
Oh, absolutely. The way he uses words to reveal the Duke's character, it's masterful.
Should we dive into that a bit?
Let's do it. I'm all ears.
All right, so we've talked about the Duke's controlling nature, the historical context, and the poem's unsettling ending. But I'm really intrigued by how Browning uses language to create this chilling portrait of the Duke. It's like he's revealing his true character without even directly telling us.
You're absolutely right. Browning is a master of subtle manipulation. He doesn't just tell us the Duke is arrogant or insecure. He shows us through the Duke's own words.
Give me an example. What are some of the things he says that reveal more than he intends?
Well, think about how he casually name-drops Fra Pandolf, the artist who came to the Duchess's portrait, or how he brags about his 900-years-old name. He thinks he's impressing us with his wealth and lineage.
But it comes across as totally obnoxious, right? Like he's trying too hard to prove something.
Exactly. It's called dramatic irony. The Duke thinks he's presenting himself as sophisticated and powerful. But to us, the listeners, he's revealing his deep-seated insecurity and arrogance.
It's like watching someone dig their own grave with every word they say.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
And Browning does this through subtle word choices.
Yeah.
You know, the Duke's tone, his pacing. Notice how he keeps interrupting himself, going off on tangents.
Yeah.
It's like he's trying to convince himself as much as he's trying to convince us.
It makes him seem so unreliable as a narrator. Like we can't trust anything he's saying.
Right.
And that makes us work harder as listeners.
It's exactly. Browning is challenging us to read between the lines, to consider what's not being said, and to draw our own conclusions about the Duchess and her fate. We become detectives piecing together the clues from the Duke's carefully constructed facade.
And what makes it even more intriguing is that we never hear the Duchess's side of the story. Her voice is completely silenced.
That silence speaks volumes, doesn't it? It makes you wonder what she would say if she had the chance. What was her experience of this marriage? What were her hopes and dreams? What kind of person was she beyond the Duke's limited and biased perspective?
It's like there's this whole other layer to the story that's hidden from view. And Browning is inviting us to imagine what that story might be, to give voice to the silenced.
And that's what makes My Last Duchess so powerful. It's not just a creepy tale of a jealous Duke. It's a poem that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power control and the ways in which women's voices have often been marginalized throughout history.
I don't know about you, but I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for this poem. It's definitely one that I'll be thinking about for a long time.
Me too. And that's the beauty of great literature, isn't it? It stays with you, provokes you to think differently, and invites you to return to it again and again, each time discovering new layers of meaning.
Well said. So to our listener, we leave you with this. What happens when we give voice to the silenced? What new perspectives emerge when we challenge the dominant narrative and seek out the untold stories?
Keep asking those questions. Keep exploring. Keep diving deep.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into My Last Duchess. Until next time.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. We're going to be doing things a little bit differently today. Usually we've got a whole stack of articles and sources to wade through.
Right.
But today's deep dive is going to focus on just one single piece. A poem, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And it's one that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. But even if you've heard it before, even if you've read it, I think you're going to find today's episode fascinating because we're going to really peel back all the layers of meaning in Maya Angelou's Still I Rise. This poem is, as I'm sure many of you know, considered an anthem for resilience and resistance, especially in the face of prejudice and discrimination.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can't wait to unpack it all with you today. So
Definitely. It's a poem that's resonated across generations. It speaks to something very fundamental about the human experience, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. This idea that no matter what obstacles are thrown in your path, no matter how many times you get knocked down, you can always rise above it all. And Maya Angelou captures that spirit so perfectly in this poem.
She really does. And it's incredible how she's able to express such a powerful message through such vivid imagery and language. You really feel the strength and defiance in her words.
Okay, so I think maybe the best way to jump into this is just to dive right into those opening lines of the poem, right? She writes, "You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. There's no mincing words there, is there?
Not at all. She comes out swinging right from the start. It's such a powerful opening because it immediately establishes this confrontation between the speaker and this unnamed you.
Right. So who is this you that Angelou is addressing here? What do you make of that?
Well, I think the you can be interpreted in a few different ways. On one level, it's those individuals who've tried to oppress or diminish the speaker, maybe through prejudice or discrimination. But I think it also represents larger societal forces, like racism, sexism, any system that tries to hold people back because of who they are.
That really resonates. That image of being trodden in the very dirt is so powerful, so visceral. I can't help but think about the historical context here, the long history of oppression that Black people have faced, particularly in America.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes those final lines of that first stanza so impactful, right? But still, like dust all rise, even in the face of such brutality, such degradation, there's this unyielding spirit, this refusal to be broken.
It's so inspiring, and it speaks to something so universal, this idea that even when we're pushed down, we can always find a way to rise again.
Absolutely. And the way she uses that image of dust is so clever, so powerful. Dust is something that we usually think of as being insignificant, something to be swept away. But here, she's transforming it into a symbol of resilience, of something that can rise and spread, even defy gravity.
I love that. And, as you were talking about the you versus the I in the poem, it made me think about how that dynamic plays out throughout the entire piece. There's this constant push and pull, this back and forth between oppression and resistance.
That's a great observation. It's almost like a dialogue, right? The you is constantly trying to define the speaker, to limit her, to put her in a box. But the I refuses to be contained by those limitations.
Exactly. And it's not just about refusing to be defined by others. It's about embracing your own identity, your own worth, and declaring it to the world.
Yes, absolutely. And remember, this poem was written in the 1970s in the wake of the Civil Rights Movement. Angelou herself had experienced so much prejudice and discrimination in her life. So I think she's also speaking to this broader historical context, giving voice to the experiences of all those who have been marginalized and oppressed.
It's like she's channeling the voices of all those who came before her, all those who fought for freedom and equality.
Right, and she's not shying away from the pain of that history either. In one stanza, she writes, "You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise."
Those lines always send shivers down my spine. It's like she's acknowledging the very real threat of violence, the danger that comes with speaking truth to power. But even in the face of that danger, there's this unwavering courage, this determination to rise above it all.
And it's not just physical violence either, right? It's the emotional violence of prejudice and hatred, the way that words and looks can be used as weapons to try and break someone's spirit. But Angelou is saying, you can try to hurt me, but you won't succeed. My spirit is stronger than your hate.
I find it so powerful that even in the darkest moments, she still finds a way to find hope, to find strength. And she does that in part by connecting her own personal rise to these powerful metaphors drawn from the natural world. It's not just I'll rise, it's still, like dust I'll rise, or like air I'll rise, or even later in the poem, I rise like the tides.
It's so brilliant how she does that. By linking her resilience to these unstoppable forces of nature, she's emphasizing that her strength is just as natural, just as undeniable. It's not something that can be taken away from her.
And that's where I think this poem is so inspiring, so empowering. It reminds us that even when we feel small, even when we feel like we're being crushed under the weight of the world, we still have this incredible power within us to rise.
Absolutely. It's a message that resonates with people from all walks of life, regardless of their background or experiences. We all face challenges. We all get knocked down at some point. But this poem reminds us that we can always get back up. We can always find a way to rise.
And I think one of the things that makes this poem so special is that it's not just about individual resilience. It's also about collective strength, about drawing inspiration from those who came before us.
That's such an important point. It's about recognizing that our struggles are interconnected, that we're part of a larger historical narrative. And we can draw strength from those who fought for justice before us, from those who paved the way for us to rise.
And that really comes through in those final stanzas of the poem where she writes, "Out of the huts of history's shame I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling I bear in the tide."
Chills. That's where she really connects her personal journey to the broader historical struggle for Black liberation. She's drawing on the strength of her ancestors, those who endured unimaginable suffering but never lost their hope for freedom.
It's like she's saying, I am the culmination of all those struggles, all those sacrifices, and I will continue to rise, not just for myself, but for all those who came before me and all those who will come after me.
It's an incredibly powerful moment. And then she ends the poem with those iconic lines, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise.
Every time I hear those lines, I get goosebumps. It's such a powerful declaration of triumph, of unwavering hope. It's like she's saying, you can't keep me down. I will rise above all the hate, all the oppression, all the pain, and I will bring my people with me.
It's a message that continues to resonate today, just as powerfully as it did when the poem was first published. It's a reminder that the fight for justice is ongoing, and that we all have a role to play in continuing to rise up against oppression in all its forms.
It's a powerful call to action, I think. And as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. Where do you find your strength to rise in the face of challenges? What does it mean to truly rise in your own life?
That's a great question to ponder. Maybe it's about standing up for what you believe in, even when it's difficult. Maybe it's about overcoming personal obstacles and achieving your goals. Maybe it's about using your voice to speak out against injustice.
Whatever it means for you, I hope this poem inspires you to keep rising, to keep striving for a better world. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep rising.
See you next time.
See you next time.